This is from Jane.
With the temperatures outside.
That's Jane.
Sweet. He always.
Anyway, turn it off. Maybe just bump it down. Yeah, maybe it's a secret key or something.
I don't know. Frank normally does it. I don't know.
Thanks, Sam.
Oh, keys, huh?
Be careful there, child.
All right. It's 60, but it's already full.
It's probably the degree of the photo. Yeah.
Seriously, I'm gonna bump it up.
And then I would.
Let's see what's
Put it out there. Yeah. Massive on.
Shut down.
Well, at this point, I guess.
It's too late now.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Holding out hope that yes, they might at least turn it off.
Well, these guys got the speed on it. Like this, you know. What else?
I think they must have put it in the COVID air circulation system, so it blows everything in and out of the room.
That's to up here, because we different temperature than on.
Right.
Not because they.
Yeah.
Then up here, ice is this part down,
Mhm.
and it's cooler over there than it is up here.
Unfortunately, it's like in church too.
All right, so we'll see how it holds.
Yeah. You all ready?
Oh. About half an hour.
Okay.
All right, so I raised it 3.
I'll see what I can do.
Stretch it. Stretch your opening remarks.
We'll see if it works.
It's 6:30. It's time for this meeting to be called to order. This is the work session for the Virginia Horse Center. The Virginia Horse Center representatives will be making a presentation this evening about what's going on there and about the financials. So we have with us this evening, Mr. Glenn Petty, the CEO, and Ms. Sandra Thomas, the CFO. So if you all would like to take the floor, you're welcome to.
Good afternoon. I'll say a few words and then about what has been going on at the Horse Center, and then when we get to the financial part, it's Sandra. Before you, we're just getting contracts out for events for 2023, but you have a calendar that's 2022 that shows the events that we have had this year and a few to go. We have the horse trials that are going on this week, and we have about 600 stalls filled, and it's going to be a great event. And then the other thing that you have is this is a copy of an article that was in Business View magazine. The Horse Center was featured, and it went to 640,000 people all over the US and Canada. But I thought they did a very good job. And but I say the Virginia Horse Center, but I refer to it sometimes as the Community Horse Center, because we like to support the community. One thing that I'm not sure whether all of you know or not, Chuck knows, but we have about 5 miles of trails that go down to the river, and a lot of the folks with horses utilize it, but it's also, they're also open for local folks to hike. And but the other thing that we have the mezzanine, which has a lot of community events, but also I bought a house in Weatherburn, and a lot of my neighbors are walkers. So particularly in the wintertime when it's bad weather, they tell me that 4 laps on the concourse in the arena is a mile. I have not done 4 laps, but and then the other thing that relates to the community is we are hosting the new Lexington Police Department mounted unit And if you're not familiar with where the, the old Therapeutic Writing Center is, if you open up the brochure, there's an aerial, and on the extreme left side of the page is the barn and offices, and that's where the mounted unit is headquartered. And we have we're providing that rent free, and so we're excited about the mounted unit being part of the Virginia Horse Center. We are hosting about 80 to 100 events per year, and one of the things that we've lost a few events to other localities. One was, of all places, North Monroe, Louisiana. But the Chamber of Commerce there put up $50,000 for added prize money to the event. So working with Gene Clark and the Virginia Tourism Corporation, we're going to work on a grant from the Virginia Tourism that we can have in our pocket, so that when we get close to attracting a new event and a little sponsorship support helps, then we'll have that. One of the things that I like to compare the Horse Center to is a hotel and convention complex. The Coliseum is our ballroom. The stalls are our hotel rooms, and all the rings out on the grounds are meeting rooms. And as such, we charge, the stalls are rented by the night, just like a hotel room. The 12 months immediately preceding the being shut down with the pandemic, we had 44,000 stall nights. When we opened back up, the next 12 months, everyone was ready to get out. We rented 54,777 stall nights. So, and part of that was due to having some new exhibitors. One of the things that if you're out anytime, and particularly for one of our large shows, I like to take a golf cart and ride up on the hill where we park horse trailers and just look at license plates. Last January, we had hosted the BMX bike races. We had 1,159 kids from 39 different states that participated. And that's going to be back, and the Monster Truck Wars is going to be back in January. We're now 37 years old, and as such, deferred maintenance is a major issue, as I'm sure you all understand. But we have been blessed as a 501c3 and from our development office. 2 years past, they were successful in getting $3.3 million in donations. We had a new Grand Prix dressage ring that we put in. It was $1 million for the footing. 10 people wrote checks to pay for it. Barn 1 was renovated at $750,000. Almost just one person paid for it, one of our board members. And then Bent Tree Barn 5 was renovated, $650,000. And we had one exhibitor that wrote a check to do that. So we are very blessed with very benevolent Virginians. The other thing that we're blessed with right now is that we were included in the Virginia budget. And now we get a monthly check from Churchill Downs. It does not come from Virginia, but it comes from Churchill Downs that owns Colonial Downs now. And that was 1/25 of 1% of the historic horse racing handle, which is horse racing and the Rosies. So I contacted our representative in Virginia after the governor signed the budget. I said, just exactly what does that mean? It says it means you're going to get 1/25 of 1% of $3.9 billion. What that extrapolates out to at the present amount of historic horse racing handle is about 1.1 million. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of deferred maintenance that we're working on. I have projects that are several $1 million that are in our wish list. So, but the way that funding was done, it was pretty broad, but basically it said to retain and attract new events to Lexington, Virginia. So we're excited about that. And but one of the reasons for coming here tonight is to have a financial report from the Horse Center. And I'm going to turn that over to Sandra, our CFO. And I'm happy to answer any questions now, or we wait till Sandra's finished.
Just a quick one, that 1.1 million, is that an annual thing or is it a one-time thing?
It's 2 years.
2 years, okay.
And it has to be renewed next budget. But I will say it was very favorably received.
That's great.
So
Any other questions for Mr. Patty?
Actually, one more question. The BMX event, we've done that 2 years, right? Was it a 3-year sort of contract? I mean, I know that they were going to try it out for a number of years and then sort of figure out whether they wanted to continue to. So they have one more event this
it has been
January?
a 1-year contract,
Okay,
but as long as they're happy and we're happy, it will be extended, and they are happy.
cool, great, thank you.
Oh, I have a 2.5 minute video that I'd love to share with you.
Okay, thank you. And I might add that the reason the mayor is in the audience is because he needed to recuse himself from this meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
First thing about the horse business, you notice is everyone friendly. It's a great facility for horses. The facility itself is fantastic, but the people make it fantastic. The big thing about the Horse Center is it's located in a wonderful position on the east coast of the U.S. The foundation, the board, and the many donors and supporters have made it possible to have a facility that is first class. It is drawing horses from all over the country. We have rings that suit just about everyone, from dressage to hunter jumper to saddle horses, Arabians, cutting horses, and rodeos. The ground staff, they are able to accommodate virtually every discipline there is. This is a nonprofit. It's 501c3. It's not government owned. The community and the horse industry have bought in and realized the benefit this center provides to the horse industry of Virginia. As a result, we are getting donors that have been very generous, and we are able to continue to modernize this facility, from the quality of the footing in the rings, which is everything for horses, the number of stalls, the number of rings, the number of schooling rings, the places on the grounds, the 600 acres where you can lunge your horses,
or just take your horses out and let them graze in the grass?
There's not really many facilities that offer all the amenities that they offer here. The last couple of years, every time we come here, we see improvement and you know, we like to support that. We're definitely the Saddlebred and Morgans and Hackneys. The facility flows very well from the barn area to the show ring. Saddlebred and Morgan World is a very social event. So the town of Lexington has lots of unique restaurants, hotels, and things to do.
It's just absolutely beautiful here with the Blue Ridge Mountains over the blue roofs of the building. It lends itself to what horsemen like.
It's a horse-friendly facility. It's not a horse show facility. It's a horse-friendly facility that has horse shows.
Thank you.
This flashlight can burn through it.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see all of you again and to not be having Zoom meetings. So nice to have people in person. Rather than focusing on one particular year of finances, I wanted to sort of give you a picture of where we've been and where we are right now. There's a sheet that I had handed out that looks like this, has 5 years worth of operations on it. And Glenn mentioned that we had gotten $3.3 million in donations. You won't see that on here because those were for capital projects. So this is just our operating results. What you'll see is that looking at, about halfway down the page, there's something called restated net operating margin. And we've seen a significant improvement in that as we go from 2017-18 to the year that's just ended in June 30th, but we still are not operationally even at break even. We have to rely upon contributions from our donors in order to make ends meet. You also see that our unrestricted net unrestricted gifts are in the 300 to 350 range across all those years. So that's sort of what we can expect to get unless our development people can find one particular person who wants to write a large check in any year. The last 3 years, we've gotten very generous contributions from the Virginia Equine Alliance. It's a group out of Richmond, or it's headquartered in Richmond, but it's a group of equine people throughout the state that they were getting some of this historic horse racing money. And so we received $100,000 in 1920, we received $200,000 in each of the last 2 years. With our now getting the money that Glenn has just talked about, that money is going to go away. So of the 1.1 million that we're getting, we're going to need to have 200,000 of it to supplement the money that we've been getting from the Virginia Equine Alliance. You will see that our operating margin greatly improved in 22 over the last few years. That is in part because Glenn came with the mandate from the board to adjust contracts to get everybody on a more even, charging people on a consistent basis that we had not been doing before. So we were able to increase our revenue through that. We also had some larger shows this year. And we were able to reduce expenses because we no longer had to spend the money that we've been spending to do the COVID protocols that we had. We had people at the gate for almost a year, checking temperatures, and those people we were able to those positions we were able to eliminate. So right now, from a cash standpoint, we are very strong. You will see what I've highlighted in yellow is what we received as a result of COVID. We had a special COVID solicitation from our donors and our board and got about $225,000 from that. And then we were able to get PPP loans and employee retention tax credits to almost $890,000. All that money is right now sitting in the bank. We've been able, since COVID, we reopened, we were able to, our stall nights were up 10,000 that particular year. So it's helped me have working capital to be able to meet our bills. But as we're coming out of our busiest show season, we now have all that COVID money sitting in the bank, and we'll be able to use that to get us through the slow season and hopefully then rebuild it up next year. We've never had any working capital before, and it's really nice to have that. Really, but let's take questions. That's sort of the overview of what I have. If you have any particular question, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Mr. Petty had mentioned about the wonderful number of stall nights. I was wondering what the value of one stall night is.
But we charge between $20 and $25 a night for stalls. It's $25 a night in our new renovated barns, and it's $20 a night in the non-renovated barns.
Thanks. So I was just wondering,
Yeah.
I didn't think you were giving them away.
No, we're not giving them away. David, did you have a question?
I had a question. So did we ask for the money from the state?
I will let Glenn address
was it-
that.
We had some legislators who are very supportive of the Horse Center, who initiated it. And then we were grouped with the veterinary school. They got the same thing, the Virginia Horse Industry Board and the Virginia Thoroughbred Association.
Wonderful.
And it was, and I'll say, Terry Austin and Cree Deeds were the front people.
So even if we didn't officially lobby for it this legislative session, we have certainly for the last many, many years asked for exactly this when we would ask them to pay for the debt that they helped us incur, right? So is there any thought that these funds are intended to help pay down the debt?
This is no.
So we're still on the hook, so then my follow-up question is I guess in 2022, I guess we were roughly as a city with all the percentages of lodging tax, we were roughly, correct me, $235,000 that we, City of Lexington lodging tax contributed. What is that going to then?
I think, and Sandra can answer this, but I think the city of Lexington caps out at 65,000.
Only
No,
on
that's-
only on the 3%.
Oh,
But
oh,
the first 2% are worth almost 87 each.
The city of Lexington in 21-22 contributed $235,000.
Yeah.
That goes to pay the USDA debt of $604,555 each year, and it goes to pay off. It's going towards the Cornerstone loan of 1.5 million. That's down to $1,050,000.
Okay.
And if I look at over the course of the years that has been in place, cumulatively between the city and the county, we have collected $32,000 more than we paid out.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, we
I-
collected $32,000 more than we paid to USDA.
Okay, I'm not sure I followed that, but because I recall the additional 1% that we provided, that was for the Cornerstone loan, from which I remember you all were going to do footing and drainage and everything, and it sounded like footing was done by private donations.
No,
You
there
mentioned
was
10 people helped fund them.
Is an ongoing cost. So when a new ring is put in, we have to do the footing for that new ring.
Okay.
The money that we spent out of that Cornerstone loan was used to redo the footing in the Coliseum,
Understood.
not the
Okay.
footing in this new DD ring.
And was that a short-term loan? I thought, was that a 5-year loan?
It is a 7-year loan.
7-year
on
loan.
a 10-year AM. So in 2025, I have a $600,000 balloon
Yeah.
that will be coming due.
Okay.
Which is something we'll be talking about, how we're going to either pay that or refinance that balloon. And just was speaking to Jim, we may want to talk about refinancing it sooner rather than later because of what's happening with interest rates right now.
Okay. Was there any thought, since for at least a decade, we've been asking the Commonwealth of Virginia to help us pay the debt on the USDA loan that they helped us incur, that's, again, I'll go back to that, those funds that Terry Austin and Senator Deeds helped facilitate, that would be the thought of the board at the Horse Center, that just to say, oh, look, we've been asking for this for many years and now we've gotten money. Maybe
But from the state standpoint, they are providing money to pay the debt down. They are paying the 2% in the state statute is what they think is in place.
okay.
This particular money was solicited to make the Horse Center more competitive,
Okay.
to be able to continue to attract shows and to retain the shows that we have.
Got it.
We are not the state of the art as many of the other horse facilities are.
Anyone else?
So as such, for the new funds, the 1.1 million, is that going into capital then, or is it showing up in the operating budget?
It is, at this point, it is being determined exactly how it's going to be used, but it is not
Okay.
in our operating budget. The only thing in our operating budget would be that we know we've got to replace the $200,000 that we've been getting from the Virginia Equine Alliance.
Oh, right.
We need about $550,000 a year in contribution to bridge the gap between our operations and what it takes, what the shows generate and what it costs to run the facility.
Okay, thank you.
We're working with our executive committee now to prioritize projects. But right now, I think it's $4 million in projects that are on our wish list. So we have a lot more projects than we have money.
And the projects range from continuing to deal with the stormwater drainage problems that we have. We've been able to address some of that, but we still have some of it. We've got a lot of roads that need to be improved so that we don't spend so much time and money on dust suppression. So some non-sexy kind of things to spend money on.
I remember being at a meeting, we were invited to the Horse Center and we had a presentation about soccer fields that were going to get built. And again, I'm going back in time. However, we were all there. We were all excited. They were talking about who was going to build them. We heard it all. Just again, I know that's not your focus and maybe it should have never been your focus, but any talk on that?
Working with the county.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, they are renting the land from us for $1 to put the soccer fields on, but it was always their project.
Okay.
We were providing the land and they were providing the rest of it.
Understood.
And what I've been told, it was before my time, but the lady that was really the driving force, her kids grew up out of soccer and the person pushing it is no longer pushing.
Anyone else? I'd like to ask, how many people approximately do you have on your payroll now, or are a lot of the jobs contracted out?
We have just under 50.
And none of the jobs are contracted out. I'm the only contracted employee because I have what's called a fractional CFO. So I have other clients, but everybody else is an employee.
Okay. Even the food service as well, you have your own?
Yes, right now we do.
Good. Wonderful. Well, I'll tell you, I must say that the Virginia Horse Center has added such a vibrancy to Lexington and Rockbridge County. I keep hearing that there are more and more people that visit the Horse Center are finding their way to downtown, and we're so thankful for that. So you all must be doing something to get them to come out.
They love Lexington downtown. It's very unique. It's something they don't have at other facilities around the country. And I mean, Lexington is just wonderful.
We think so too.
Yeah, I think downtown Lexington sells itself.
Absolutely. Yes.
I will add to that in, it must have been fall of 2020 when not much was happening downtown. I went down one night during the week and it was packed downtown and talked to the owner of the Georges. And the Georges was completely booked up because of the horse shows that were in town. And it was nice to see people coming in for the horse shows and coming into town. So thank you for that.
We had more people, more horses, more shows than we ever had.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, we thank you for all you're doing and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned and we shall await the start of the regular meeting for tonight.
All good. As far as I know. I think so. Dang. I feel short. Then we got a comment complaining about his neighboring Vesuvius. Well, thank you very much. Exactly. Ready for your pledge, please? Need an agenda? Fair enough. If council members are ready, I'd like to call the Lexington City Council meeting of Thursday, November 3rd to order. And first order of business, if you all will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes or additions or deletions. And unless there's an objection, we will adopt the agenda as presented and move straight into presentations. I'd like to invite Don Hasfurther with the Historic Lexington Foundation for annual report. Don, welcome to City Council, and I look forward to hearing your insights.
Thank you, Frank, and really appreciate the opportunity to bring you up to speed on what we're doing. You have our two latest newsletters in front of you, and that'll give you a pretty good idea of our work over the last year. And there's also a membership brochure that Bob Keefe put together, and that's a great discussion piece of what HLF has done over many years. I first set foot in this little town in 1962, if you can believe that. And it was my older brother just enrolled in Washington, LA. And I remember Lexington as a sleepy little southern town back then. There was a pool hall on either Washington or Nelson Street. And what I do remember is back then, the freshmen at Washington and Lee were required to speak to everybody that they passed on campus. And I say, what a difference 60 years makes. I'd like to go back to that period as opposed to the little students on their phones. But anyway, there was a lot going on in Lexington back that period, 62, 63, 64. You all know the Barclay House, now better known as Beaumont. It was built between 1821 and 1825 by Samuel Darst for his residence. And sometime mid-1960s, Kappa Alpha Order let it be known that they wanted to demolish this house and build a brand new structure there for their headquarters. And it's rather ironic in a way in that Larry Weiss, who's the executive director of Kappa Alpha, is now our president. And they're such wonderful stewards of Mulberry Hill, which if you've never been there, you really need to visit. And that brought citizens together in Lexington to realize that we have really important things to save. And they began a campaign to raise money, and then a campaign to purchase some of the properties that were in dire need, beginning with the Alexander Withrow House. They purchased it, stabilized it, and probably many of you know this, but you might not, and I think it's important, stabilize it and then found an owner. And probably most importantly, HLF put an easement on the property so that the exterior of that house would be forever preserved. And then they purchased a few other houses along North Main Street, including the McCampbell Inn that was in terrible shape at that point in time, and did the same thing, found somebody after stabilizing it that bought it and was prepared to restore it and use it. And again, with an easement, only for the exterior of these houses. And the interiors have been substantially changed over the years. One exception to this came later, and that was the Hopkins house on Nelson Street, rather. And that included some interior historic easement, including on that little brochure that you've got in front of you, the mantelpiece there, which is a terrific historic document. And wander in there sometime. It's fascinating. And then probably about 4 years ago, the Lexington Presbyterian Church came to me and they said, we're going to sell our manse, but we want to make sure that it's protected. And I said, fine, I'll write up an easement, and I did. It was the most restrictive easement of all that we have, and including not just the exterior, but the interior, the mantelpieces, the doors, windows. And we even went further than that. Arthur Bartenstein, who you probably know, he helped me with this. And we actually have landscaping easements on that property. Those wonderful trees that go up and are so important to that house. Where do we get our money from? We have an annual appeal, which we're about to undertake. And we also became a membership organization a few years ago. But we haven't invoiced people for membership because we really, with the pandemic, haven't been doing things. And reason you have membership is you do events and you invite people and they participate. But we're gonna start to go back out and get new members. But the thing that probably has provided more funding than anything for us and for our work are bequests, people who have left money in their wills, including a Washington Lee math professor by the name of Bob Johnson. And I knew Bob very well. We worked together back when Preservation Virginia had branches, and we were on that branch. And it was with real sadness that I heard of his passing. But subsequently, I got news from an attorney that he had left $20,000 for HLF in his will. And so I approached the board and I said, I really want to use this for our downtown. I went over to City Hall and met with John Elstad. And I said, John, I've got $20,000. Would you be willing to match it to come up with a facade trust for the downtown? And here's what I envisage. We'd be willing to put a quarter of the cost of doing work on these facades up to $2,000. So if it was going to be over $8,000, that would be the owner that did that. And I don't know exactly how many, but we've at least helped make the town a lot better, probably with 15 facade grants. And we still got money in the bank, but when we start to run out, I'm going to go talk to Jim and see if we can't replenish that. The biggest bequest that we got was from Margaret Davis. And I don't know how many of you knew Margaret Davis. She's very involved with Sigma Nu. A wonderful lady, English to begin with, but made Lexington her home. And she left us a bunch of money. And again, what can we do with this money? Well, we put a bunch of that into the Gospel Way Church of God in Christ on Henry Street. It's a Black church. It was built in, I think, 1873 as the original St. Patrick's Church. We had all of the guttering removed, fascia boards, new boards put up, the roof painted, the steeple painted, and a few other things to the tune, I think, of $40,000. So that's kind of who we are and what I think is important work that we do for Lexington. And subsequently, I live in Rockbridge County, and I love the county and the history of the county. So we're doing more and more now in the county in terms of preservation and events. Another church project, and back to the facade grant program. One of the structures that we did put $20,000 or $2,000 into was for repair and repainting of the steeple on First Baptist Church on Main Street. So there are a whole variety of businesses, churches that we've done that. And another church project that we're going to be undertaking soon is the Randolph Street United Methodist Church. The stained glass window over top of the front doors was severely damaged, I guess, in a storm. The top part has come off. Some of the windows are cracked. They have approached a company in Lynchburg who is going to restore this. And they had raised within the congregation $7,000 for almost $14,000 worth of work. And we're going to match that. So that's going to be repaired and put back in place. And I can't wait to get there and meet the congregation. I've met the minister before. But anyway, that's another example of the things that we're doing in Lexington. On the little film that we saw from the Horse Center, you may have noticed a historic marker in the downtown, and we started that program 6 or 7 years ago, and are trying to develop it so that there are more markers around town, including out in the residential areas near the downtown. And what we want to do is a walking tour brochure that people can take it and go to all these places where there are historic markers. In our annual meeting this past May, out at Timber Ridge Church, we announced that we had applied for and received Virginia Department of Historic Resources approval for a highway marker. And it's a highway marker for Timber Grove that preceded Timber Ridge. It was, they say, the original settlement in what is now Rockbridge County. And we've just applied for another one, and this should be of interest to all of you, a marker for the Green Book. The Green Book was what African Americans who visited Lexington and other localities used to determine where they could stay, where they could eat. And so we've applied for that, and we'll know whether or not we'll receive approval to do it in I think on the 9th of December. And it will feature the Franklin Colored Tourist Home. And the plan is to place it down at the visitor center so that it's visible, and people that come and visit will see it. And it's a neat story. And in May, and this is following up a lot of work that we've been doing, we did a program for National Preservation Month featuring former slave houses in Rockbridge County. And we've been working 3 years or more ago with Virginia Humanities to document these houses so that they could be saved. And we had an event together with the Brownsburg Museum where we opened 5 of these houses in Brownsburg that people could go around and see them. And Cinder Stanton, who lives in Lexington now, who had come over from Monticello, then subsequently gave a presentation on the relationship between Lexington and Monticello from the standpoint of enslaved people. And then the end of the month, and this is my favorite because I love the guy, Charles Dew, who wrote the book, The Bond of Iron. And that's about Buffalo Forge and the relationship between the master and the slave down there. So he spoke at Falling Spring Presbyterian Church. And we subsequently had a visit to Buffalo Forge. They opened up the slave houses. Cemeteries are another thing that we've been working on substantially, if you're not aware, working with Hammer Memorials to repair and reset a lot of gravestones, both in Oak Grove Cemetery and in Evergreen Cemetery. And more recently, we're working with them on Falling Spring Cemetery, which in my estimation is maybe the most important cemetery in the county with Revolutionary War veterans, 1812, Civil War, and then a lot of important people. So that's what we've been up to, and we're now in the planning process for next year, what we're going to do for our annual meeting and Preservation Month. One of the things that Jim and I are going to get together and talk about this. We drove out to the Horse Center a couple of weeks ago, and I had not been by the Sheridan House in a long time. And I featured it in a newsletter a couple of years ago with the hope that this house is going to be saved. It's on North Randolph Street at the top. And as we drove by, I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness gracious, half of the roof is now gone. The owners had told me that they were going to put a new roof on it and restore the interior, take it back to a single family house. But it's something that I think we need to put at the top of our agenda right now to make sure that we don't lose that house. Sheridan being such an important individual back in the 19th century to Lexington. So I look forward to that conversation and maybe meeting with the owners and going from there. But anyway, that's my report. I appreciate your listening to me. Probably spoke too long, but
never speaking too long about good and successful projects for HLF. We appreciate you being here. Do members of council have any questions for Don? Mr.
I
Smith.
say, I appreciate your work.
thank you.
I read almost everything. There are probably a few things that slip by, but I notice on Facebook, there's constant new pictures or pictures of old things that Historic Lexington is putting up, historic pictures there, and I always learn something.
Yeah, and that's thanks to Bob Keefe, who has done so much for us. As I'm sure you know, we did a book, I don't know, 5 years or so ago on the architecture of historic Rockbridge. Worked with Dan Pizzoni, but Bob did all of the graphic work there. He did that little brochure, the membership brochure. We've been doing a calendar for the last 2 years featuring historic properties in the area. And so there are a lot of good people out there that really, make my life a lot easier.
Mr. Smith.
Thanks for coming down. Appreciate getting updated. I was on the board when HLF bought the house on Fuller Street and got it back up to standards and sold it. So it was fun to participate in that project.
That was an example of why we don't buy houses anymore.
It was an undertaking.
Yeah, we bought it and ended up putting $100,000 into it because the city was going to demolish it, and it's again an important African American site. So we put $100 grand into it and finally sold it for 50. And that's not good mathematics, but we did save it. And up until earlier this year, we owned the house behind the post office. It had been purchased by a young man, and apparently his health, he was going to restore it, and his health didn't allow him to do it. And we sold it, and that put another $500,000 into our bank account, a lot of which we've lost in the last a few months with the stock market and all of that. But anyway, it's been fun. I've been doing this for 12 years, and that's a long time. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to converse with you all.
Ms. Alexander.
Yes, there are so many things that I could sit here and thank you for what you all are doing in the community. But one thing comes to mind, and that's the posts that you have on Facebook. Because if you think about all of the people, especially in the Black community, who have left the area and have never come back. They always want to know what's going on. And those are reminders of their past. And it's very much appreciated. And I do hear from people
Yeah.
quite a bit when we post things that are from the past.
Yeah, and we're on Instagram too, and I hate to admit it, but that's over my head. I don't know how to use Facebook.
That's only because you got started here in 1962. But Don, I want to pile on saying thank you. The cemetery support that HLF has provided, the facade grants from the Johnson funds in particular, and a special thank you to your board for all their work and dedication in making Lexington the special place it is architecturally and the fabric of the life around here. I know that Royster Lyle, who was instrumental in getting this started, would be proud of the legacy that you're continuing to lead today. And it's incumbent upon us each day and every year to educate each new Washington Lee class of the speaking tradition and keep that going. The cadets do a good job tipping their hat as well, but those are traditions that I hope we can continue to embrace and educate the new folks that come into our community. Support them with
I
that.
didn't mention that we do have a Lyle Simpson Preservation Fund that we have used right now exclusively in the county. A new roof will go up on the 1823 Hamilton School, the log school church in South Buffalo Creek area. We put a new roof on the slave house at Verdon Acres near Brownsburg, and are about to finance a window restoration on Whitehall, another slave dwelling there.
So get your checkbooks out. You can join, you can make contributions and support HLF. Don, thanks for being with us. And again, please take our appreciation back to all of your board and membership. Thank you, sir. Next on our agenda is the Chamber of Commerce report from Tracy Lyons. Tracy, come on down. Thanks for joining us.
And I do have a little handout if that's okay. No, go along. So I put together, thank y'all for inviting me to be here tonight. It's always a pleasure to be here and to brag on our great business community. And I think it's also fun to look back at all the things that we've been doing this year and kind of where we've been and where we're going. So in front of you, you have our current strategic plan. And so we're going to talk a lot about it tonight because this is kind of like our guiding document. This is what I use in a little bit of everything that we do. So when I started at the Chamber in 2015, we had a very different strategic plan. It was very much a like bottom up, let's get things organized, right? So we did things like adopt a balanced budget and approve, like put in place bylaws and have operating procedures and manuals. We spent a lot of time really getting to where we are today. It took a lot of hard work from our board, a lot of volunteers, but they did it, and a lot of just investment in the business community. So I'm appreciative of that. So in 2018, and I will skip forward. Do I use there we go. Okay, so that works easy. So what you have in front of you is the strategic plan. This is really kind of, like I say, the Chamber, we do a lot of things and we do a lot of different things. And every day we're asked to be a part of something different, to support something different. And I always have to ask myself these questions. I look at our strategic plan and I say, does it fall into one of these pillars? Can we somehow say, yes, we want to support that, but it really has to fit into our strategic plan so that we know we're being mindful and we're really kind of strategically putting our resources where they should be to really push our community forward. So of course, our goal at the Chamber is to really get Rockbridge and recognize Rockbridge's greatest potential. So we adopted this goal for our strategic plan back in 2018. And I'll briefly, before we get into it, talk briefly about where we are now. Usually strategic plans are 3 to 5 years. So we're kind of at the end of that. 2 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic and our board looked at it and said, you know what, it's not that we don't want to update this, it's that this is exactly where we need to be. If you see the pillars and you see the goals in 2018, they're the same then that they are now. And so while the pandemic did shape us in different ways and we learned a lot from it, the things that we were talking about 5 years ago are still the same and still very relevant today. They're just a little bit different on how we tackle them and approach them and the ways that we are doing that. So the goal for the strategic plan was the Chamber of Commerce serving Lexington, Buena Vista, and Rockbridge County is committed to enhancing the prosperity of its members and to realizing Rockbridge's greatest potential. So we know we have a lot of great things for us, but we've got to capitalize on those and be able to tell our story. The mission of the Chamber is to champion social and economic progress for our community, and our vision is to be your community resource. So this is our first pillar, and I want to kind of draw your attention to it. So what I did is really looked back on all the things that we're doing. And this is some of the things that our committees work on, that our staff works on. When we look at the sustain pillar, sustain our region as one community working together. We do a lot of relationship building. We do a lot of connecting. A lot of people join the chamber because they want to meet people. I mean, really, and they want to grow their business. They want to get to know people in the community, but we make so many connections. So this is all about those connections. One of the big things is facilitating conversations amongst all of our jurisdictions. We think it's really important to recognize why it's important to work together. We have monthly economic development meetings. The Ready Grant you've heard a lot about. That is the kind of the goal for us to continue to find projects that come out of that committee that we can all work together as a region. One of the most recent ones was the housing study that we're all embarking on. That was just one of the goals of the plan of the Ready Grant 3 years ago, that we said, we need to talk about housing, and we still need to talk about housing. And we're still finally talking about housing. Roundtable conversations with our elected officials. We have those bi-monthly. We kind of rotate them between the jurisdictions. Those are just an opportunity to have FaceTime with our elected officials for any members in any of the community. We have our annual State of the Community breakfast, which is an update from all of you. And then new this year, coming in 2023, is an Economic Outlook breakfast. So to hear from our economic development officials for the city of Lexington, from maybe one of you or from Jim, to talk about economic development, potential opportunities for the community to hear from us. I think a lot of times we talk about things and we hear a lot about it. We don't tell our stories enough, and we don't tell our success stories enough. And we want to be that line to do that and provide those avenues to tell the good things that are happening in Rockbridge. Promoting entrepreneurship. We do this a lot. We have a lot of partnerships, a lot of connections. One of the big ones was the Small Business Development Center. They're headquartered where our headquarters is north of us. So they're in Waynesboro, Fishersville, in their partnership with the Virginia Career Works. A couple of years ago, we said, we never see you. You're never in Rockbridge. It's so hard to connect with you. You say that you're providing these services, but you're not really. One of the best things that came out of the pandemic is they have so many more staff now. They're able to really be here. So twice a month, they're in the chamber office. They have meetings all day long with potential business owners, current business owners, chamber members, non-members, people from all over come to Lexington, and then bi-monthly to Buena Vista as well, and just meet with them. And they help with so many things. So resource-wise, we're not saying that we can provide them all, but the Small Business Development Center is a huge advocate for us, and we use them a lot for their resources. We partner and we're a mentor with the Gauntlet Entrepreneurship Program, as well as serving as a member of the Walker Program Board. We also partner with the Shenandoah Community Capital Fund. This is a new fund that a lot of people haven't heard of. They're headquartered in Stanton. They serve the whole valley. Today, one of our staff spent the whole afternoon with them brainstorming on ways that they can have an impact in our community. So where are these funds that they have that they're raising, and how can they spend them here? Not necessarily all over the valley, but in Lexington and Rockbridge County. And so we're excited for that. It's kind of a newer partnership, but they have a lot of capital, a lot of entrepreneurship support that we really want to bring here to Lexington. Representing the voice of our community. This has been a big, a push in the last year, at least, to really show people and members why it's important that their voice is important, and to understand that it really is. It makes a difference. No matter how small your business or who you are, your voice does matter. And so we're a member of Virginia West, which is a coalition of chambers on the western side of the state. And what that means is we come together and we can be a little bit bigger of a dog, have a dog in the fight when it comes to Capitol Hill. We're not Hampton Roads and we're not Northern Virginia, and that's okay. But when we have things that are important to the western side of the state, like the I-81 corridor, we can all come together and say, this is what we make some noise, and we want to draw attention to it and get the funding that we need, have the bills that we want passed, and really come together kind of on an advocacy agenda that promotes positive business relations. So remember that we've been doing a lot more with them. I am active member of the VACI Board of Directors. That's our state board for chambers. We get a lot of business resources from them. We also have Chamber Day at the Capitol in January. We participate. We talk to our Congress men and women and leaders and just tell them what we're seeing in rural Virginia. They love to be ears on the ground. So just kind of a way to promote that advocacy in a positive light that's really not political, but it's all about advocacy for a positive business climate. We host our annual candidates forum, which some of you recently participated in. And also new this year, we invited the Attorney General's office to come to our office and just have office hours. He had a full schedule all afternoon, just meeting with members. I'm not sure what about, let's close doors, but it just opened that line of communication for them to say, hey, we're here, come, your voice matters. And they brought all kinds of businesses, which was really cool to see. So just being that avenue for connections is really important for us. Cultivating our region is a thriving hub for business. So we know this is one of the main tenets of a chamber. It's what we were founded on. It's what we want to continue to do. We facilitate networking opportunities. All of you participate in those monthly. We love that. We have signature events. We've brought some pretty big speakers into town that we think are really important. Tom Barkin was with us this year, as well as Nancy Agee. Those types of speakers are just great for business leaders in the community to have those connections. We're always cultivating new resources. We have classes, we offer marketing help and QuickBooks help and just online things to build your business and your platforms. We have a new website being launched in 2023. We're very excited about that new resource library. Our goal is for someone to say, I want to start a business in Rockbridge, and what do I do? We want them to be able to go to the chamber site and to say, this is all I need, right? Here's the resources I need. Here's who to call to get a business license. Here's the locality I'm in. This is who can help me with zoning. This is who can help me with X, Y, and Z. So it's a little bit of things that the city does, but it's also pushing to the right locality and not just making them go around in circles. So really helping those entrepreneurs be successful from the very beginning. Also, just supporting local jurisdictions in the recruitment of new businesses. We're not the economic developers for our county or the cities, but we really support them. We're there to cut the ribbon. We're there to help with workforce. We're there when they're trying to recruit a business and saying, hey, we need these things. We need to know these numbers, the statistics. We're there to support that. And so we work really well with them. See them on a daily basis, talk on a daily basis. And it's really, I think, a good, positive relationship for all of Rockbridge and Lexington, especially. Developing a skilled and diverse workforce. So as you see, this was a tenet 5 years ago. We're still really talking about it today. We have tried many things at the chamber, and I think everyone have. But what we really have found is that we have a really strong education and workforce committee. That committee was started to support this pillar 5 years ago. They've built it into a really dynamic group of people that represent our K-12 institutions, our technical schools, our colleges, all four of our universities. And they come together and they talk about Rockbridge County as a whole and our workforce needs. They talk about gaps in the workforce needs. They identify kind of potential opportunities, and they're the ones that develop and put on the programs that we have. Right before the pandemic hit, we did a career fest for our middle school students. It was hugely successful. We took all of our middle school students to the Horse Center for a day. We had 12 to 15 different industry clusters. They visited all of them. We sat them down. We talked to them about soft skills. We talked to them about what it means to choose a career, what a career pathway looks like, and how they're all different. And that's okay. We're going to do that again in March of 2023. We're really excited because this year we think we've gone a step further. We're partnering with the schools to not only bring them there, but also to have them take it back to the classroom and then do something with it, and it not just sit in the back of their minds, and really use that as a skill to make those connections and get them furthering their thought process on what does my career look like? What's that pathway look like for me versus other people? We're also excited. We are partnering with the high school this year on a trade fair in Rockbridge County. So we know they do a college fair. They've always done that. Robin Sherman is amazing. She's a game changer. She is very innovative and idea focused, and I love her. She has been a great advocate to have at the high school. She works in the CTE program, but she works with all the students on careers. So she's starting a trade fair where students will have the opportunity to come in as a student and say, I want to do this, but I don't know what that looks like, right? Do I need training? Do I need a certificate? Do I not? Can I just take an online course and get a job? Can I work while I go to school? All those questions, to have all the partners in the room, is really the key to identifying the gaps and getting them across the finish line and getting them a job, which also means a job in Rockbridge County, which is important. So that's one of the big things. Another thing we're looking at is launching what we're calling Rockbridge Works. And it's really an online platform to identify how to help. How are we helping our students? How are we helping our teachers? And then how are we helping our employers? And are they all talking? Because I think they're all talking, but on different levels, right? And how are we identifying it and really making the connections? So in the next year, it's going to be a big push for us. We've talked a lot about identifying the issues or what's going on in Rockbridge County. We all know housing and transportation and childcare are hot topics. But I think a lot of times where all those become hot topics is when we look back, we take a step back, and we look at our high school, we look at our K-12 partners and our education and what we're doing and what's really happening and how the connections maybe aren't happening on that level. And so we're really trying to look back at that, look at our middle schoolers and make sure we're giving them what they need, but then also our high schoolers, and not just our 9th through 12th graders, but like every single year, are they getting exactly where they need to be on different levels? And that's hard because they're all on different pathways to career pathways. So we want to try to be a good partner of that. We may not have the answers, but I think we can pull in the right people to make our high schoolers successful and to see some of these workforce solutions that maybe we don't have right now coming out of our high schoolers. So this is a big push. We all have talked about workforce. We're trying some new and innovative things that we hope will be successful. You're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming year. And we're really trying our best to get our employers back into the schools pre-COVID. COVID has kind of stopped that, but really getting them that face time and getting the students out in the workforce to see what really is happening. So other than that, I wanted to highlight the strategic plan. I always love to recognize our board of directors. We have 18 members of the Chamber's board of directors. They're small business owners, large business owners. They represent different backgrounds. They live in all the different localities. It's really important to us to have a wide range of individuals. And these are our ones that set the strategic plan. They're not the day-to-day operations, but they're the ones serving on our committees, guiding the principles of the chamber and doing the work. So we'll have 6 new board members starting in January, but I'm very grateful for their service. It takes a lot of volunteers to make the chamber run. We have dozens of committees and hundreds of volunteers, and we appreciate them so much. So while we have a small staff of 3, we have a lot of people who help us. So I want to say thank you to them. These are some of our memberships that were members of the U.S. Chamber, the State Chamber, the Shenandoah Valley Partnership was our economic development partnership, and Virginia West, which I mentioned earlier, our advocacy organization. Also, thank you to our partners. These are all the organizations that make the chamber happen. We partner with them on a lot of different things, especially, like I mentioned, Virginia Career Works and the Small Business Development Center, our localities. We thank all of you. And then also tourism and our 2 main streets. We work a lot in partnership to support their advocacy and what they're doing and make sure that they're able to serve the populations that they have and that we're building them up to be successful. But that's it. I put a couple dates coming up. We have our annual meeting next week, a roundtable coming up with Creed Deeds on November 22nd, an event that is a kind of keep the cheer here, shop local donation event on December 3rd. And next year is the Chamber Centennial. So the Chamber is actually started January 11th. 1923, and it was the Lexington Chamber of Commerce. So it's the first iteration of a Chamber of Commerce being started. A group of business owners came to the city council and they petitioned to start a chamber. And so on that day, they formed the first chamber. They adopted bylaws and elected officers, which is really cool to see. So we'll have a kickoff event for that and then a celebration kind of throughout the year just to highlight business owners that have been here for 100 years. Later in the 30s is when we became the Lexington Rockbridge Chamber. And then closer to 1990, in the 90s is when we adopted the Buena Vista Chamber and we all became one. So, but we want to celebrate where we first started, and that was right here in Lexington. So, any questions, anything I didn't highlight, or questions about what we're doing?
Members of council have any questions? I'm just at the beginning, I think you said you started in 2015.
Yes, January 2015.
Wow.
I know.
Coming up on
Been
8
fun.
years.
I know.
Congratulations.
It's been a fun 8 years. Thank you.
Seems like it was just yesterday.
It does seem like it was yesterday. Yes. Mhm.
Well, on behalf of all the city council and the grateful citizens of Lexington, thank you for the tireless work that you and your team, and especially as you indicate your volunteers, the dinner dance and all the meetings and the things that get organized and scheduled and carried out, the ribbon cuttings, which we're so blessed to have so many the past couple of years, despite COVID. You all getting that accomplished. We are eternally grateful, and so keep up the good work, and look forward to supporting your efforts going forward.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, ma'am. Great job. Next item on the agenda is small cell zoning text amendment presentation. Asked Arnie to come forward and get us up to speed on these proposed amendments. For us to chat. This is just for information, his presentation, so you can absorb it. And at a date and time in the near future, we will be considering the amendments that he's going to talk about tonight for adoption. Arnie, take it away.
Good evening to you all. It's always a little bit difficult to follow more dynamic subjects such as economic development and history with codes. But since I am your zoning administrator, that is my shtick. A little bit of background, in 2017 and 2018, the state developed rules and regulations for telecommunications facilities sort of in general, but specifically small cells, because small cells is the newer thing. In the federal government at that level, they did it about a year or two before that. So I think in 2016, if I remember correctly. So we now have rules and regulations, and ours are behind. We have a couple of use and design standards for broadcasting towers and and transmission towers, and that's it. So if we don't adopt anything to handle this newer technology, which is a small cell facility, then we're really not going to be able to regulate it. Now, I will say that we are very limited on how we can regulate it through that state and federal legislation. But again, if we don't do anything, then we're not going to have any oversight. I struggled a little bit with how much to present to you. So I'm going to keep it as more of an overview tonight because we're looking at about 10 and 11 pages of regulations. And you think, oh, small cells, it's just this little thing, no more than 6 cubic feet in size for the antenna. So on that second page for you. And the equipment shelter is no larger than 28 cubic square feet, which is a decent sized refrigerator just for comparison. But they didn't only provide sort of limitations on how we can handle small cells, but also reaching back to our traditional transmission towers. And just by way of comparison, the transmission tower that you see, which they call a macro cell, that's the typical transmission tower that you would see around going up and down the interstate. It has a couple of different antenna arrays on top, primarily for cell, but also for other purposes. And that has a range of several miles. The small cell, again, is something an antenna of 6 cubic feet or smaller. This is all federal definition. And the equipment cabinet is 28 cubic feet or smaller. And there's some exceptions for that, for if there has to be an electric meter that's not counted, and there's some other exceptions to how they measure that. That has a range of a few hundred yards in coverage. And small cells are not intended to necessarily provide coverage because we already have coverage throughout the entire city by several providers. So these are for higher data uses. So if we had a really good football team and a whole bunch of people attended a game, and all of a sudden everybody's taking selfies and pictures and videos and trying to broadcast that out, they might not have enough service or capacity for that. Just to give you an example, how soon might we actually see a small cell, because we haven't had an application or request for one yet. The company that was trying to put antennas on top of the Gin Hotel a couple of years ago, I asked that gentleman, he had a knowledge of our community and also had knowledge of these new small cell things. I said, from what you know about us, about how long before we could expect one? And this was a year ago. He said, maybe 5 years. So we're not Northern Virginia, where they're coming in with applications for 50 of these at a time. So we're just not going to see one just because of our population and just because I think of our data needs. I'm not an expert, but it's not, we could have 1 or 2 come in tomorrow or soon, but for the most part, we're not going to see very many of these. But again, if we don't have the rules and regulations adopted, then we're not going to be able to have any sort of oversight where we are allowed to have oversight. Planning Commission is holding an advertised public hearing next Thursday on the 10th. And as soon as they're done with that, we will bring or advertise a public hearing for you all, which could be as early as the first meeting in December. So this is just sort of a prelude to make you aware that this is going to be on your agenda for a public hearing shortly. The way the regulations are going to fall, and I didn't provide you with the proposed regulations yet, but they really fall into 2 major groups. One is a standard process project, and those are things that can be approved by a conditional use permit. But the other basket, are administrative review eligible projects. So the things that you don't have, or the public doesn't get to review through a conditional use permit through the public hearing process, but rather it's administrative. And there are quite a number of things that are administrative. As an example, if there's an existing transmission tower and somebody co-locates an antenna or a small cell facility on that, that impact is already there. You're only adding antennas onto it. So that's administrative review eligible. It doesn't go through a conditional use permit. The installation of the small cells are administrative review eligible. So you're only going to be seeing them in certain cases, and the Architectural Review Board is going to be seeing them when they're in the downtown historic district. Which leads me to, you think that it's a relatively simple process, but we're actually going to be changing 5 different sections of the zoning ordinance, amending the historic district design guidelines, and also amending the streets and sidewalks chapter in 2 different sections. Now, some of the streets and sidewalks chapter, those code sections are really old and need updating anyway. And then in addition to those things that I just mentioned, there will also need to be updates to the franchise agreements that Jared's already worked on and has a draft ready for that. So there's quite a bit involved. If we are presented with an application, we need to have rules and regulations in place, as I mentioned. And then also when somebody's doing work in the right of way, then they have to follow all the right of streets and sidewalks chapter, as well as coming forward to you and getting an application or approval for franchise agreements. Franchise agreements are above my head, so that's why we have Jared working on that part of it. But just to let you know, I thought when I started this, how hard could this be? It's been quite complicated, quite honestly. I think that's all I have for, when I was putting together this presentation, the city manager had a question, how many of these could we see as far as sort of spread out? And if it's a new structure, the code says that, or the proposed code says that if it's a new structure, that you will be limited to only having one within at least 500 feet radius from existing wireless support structures. But that's only for a new structure. So these can definitely go on to existing utility poles. And if they're not greater than 50 feet in height, and if the antenna is no more than 10 feet in height, so you can have more of these within 500 feet of one another, depending on how big they are and how much of an impact they are. But new structures, if it's a new structure and new structure is defined in the code, then it has to be at least 500 feet from an existing wireless structure. To give you sort of a locational or a spatial for new structures that would have a bigger impact than if they're going in the historic district, where they're really encouraged to be hidden from view behind screening and using some stealth technology. That's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Arnie. I know one of the big things is just working to balance our historic downtown in particular with new technology and being business supportive. So we want to keep up with the times and have technology available, but certainly don't want to pollute the poles. And this picture is interesting. I remember at a VML conference, pictures from California in particular with high density, and instead of one being on the light pole, it was like 4 or 5. So you almost couldn't identify that there was a light pole. It was just a placeholder for these small cells. And because there were no regulations at the time, the folks at VML and at the conference were advocating that we look at and adopt a policy such as this so that we can have some control over what gets, what your vision is walking down the street. Any questions for Arnie? Mr. Alligood.
Thank you very much. Do we have, or do you have an estimate of how many of these things we potentially are looking at being installed in the city?
I'd asked not a cell provider, but a person that actually does work with the communications facilities, locating them. And they mentioned that we might see one in 5 years.
Oh, well, 1 in 5 years. My question is not 1 in 5 years, but how many installations are we potentially looking at in the city? Because there's coverage. You said there are radius numbers for each one of those. I was just wondering if we would fill up the city with those things. Is that envisioned?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, then I don't think we're going to ever in the near term, unless everybody gets another 5 devices and does gaming and all these other things and uses up a lot of data, where additional, not coverage, but data infrastructure is needed to handle that, then we will see more of them. But it's hard to imagine in our community with the limited number of folks that we have here that we're going to be inundated with small cell facilities. And the technology as we go along is going to get better and better. And another thing that I didn't mention that it's also in the state and federal legislation is something called a microcell. It's so small that it actually hangs on existing wires. So it doesn't have a ground support structure of any kind. And there's definition of it as well. I can't remember how big, but it actually hangs. So over time, as the technology gets better, these things shrink down. So we should, even if there will be more of them, we should probably see less of them, if that makes any sense.
I was just trying to get a sense. Are we talking about 10 or 50 or
I really don't know.
something like, I just don't have a sense of it. That's why I asked. And there to do it. And we could all look back. You remember the original 10-foot dish? I'm just saying 10 feet TV dishes that you'd see populated around, and that created the city doing something to conceal dishes that were on tops of buildings. Now the dishes are 20 inches maybe in there. And so the technology, I appreciate, is changing. I was just wondering if we're going to have those telephone poles like the mayor is talking about populated with metal.
With this type of policy that Arnie's bringing forward, we would have a tool to deal with it if it does come about. How many we expect? None in the next 5 years, forecasted by a professional. And who knows what technology is coming next that may replace all of this, to your point.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Arnie, thank you. Or Chuck?
Quick question. So the antenna that are on the hotel downtown, does that qualify as a cellular structure?
They are cellular facilities. There's not a transmission tower
Okay.
because it's installation on top of a structure and not on top of a pole, if you will. And those are not small cells. Even the round of 4 that came before the Architectural Review Board recently, they did not meet the definition of a small cell, just as an example.
So my question is, so new small cell structures could be placed within 500 feet of the hotel.
If they're on, and again, there's a definition of structure, and I can find that for you and read that to you. But if there are exceptions to that, in other words, it's only a new structure if you're putting up a new pole. So if you're going on an existing pole or an existing building, then that you can be within 500 feet of something else.
Okay.
That's the question.
Yes.
So we could potentially have more than one every 500 feet, depending on how it's actually installed.
Operated by different companies. So when we talk about small cell, would it be one company that the city would do business with, or would it be more than one?
Oh, that's where the franchise would come into play, and cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah.
It's likely, though, that you're going to have multiple companies, just like you have Verizon and T-Mobile and others. When they see the need for additional data to cover that, then you're going to see applications for small cells potentially from a number of companies. But they will all have to go through the franchise agreements.
Right.
Thank you.
No different than our current cable company and things of that nature. Arnie, thank you for being here. We look forward to the work of the Planning Commission and this coming forward for council's further review and consideration in the near future. Next item on the agenda is public hearings and consideration of request for the city of Lexington to adjust the rear property boundary line of the property located at 14 Houston Street. Who gets the pleasure of presenting that? Arnie, welcome back.
I'm embarrassed to tell you that I did not print out my packet. So 14 Houston Street, it's fairly easy for these two. The rear portions of the properties are requested to be purchased by the city for the expansion of the cemetery. So it's a boundary line adjustment for both 14 and 16 Houston Street, but I shouldn't talk about that because we're only talking about 14 at the moment. So 0.015, I think, acres, if I remember correctly, is on the rear portion of 14 Houston Street that the city is contracted to purchase. So again, it's a boundary line adjustment to adjust the boundary line over a little bit. So the 0.15 ends up with the city as part of the cemetery.
Thank you, Arnie. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. And is there anyone here who would like to speak to this item on 14 Houston Street boundary adjustment? Hearing none, I'd like to close the public hearing at 7:57 and ask for council's consideration of this item.
I make a motion to approve the requested boundary line adjustment to allow the city to expand Oak Grove Cemetery.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Mr. Smith, Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. Next item is public hearing for consideration of requests for the city of Lexington to adjust the rear property boundary line of property located at 16 Houston Street. Arnie.
Somebody could help me out with the acreage amount.
0.15 acres, I think. Oh, it's yeah, that was that one.
Similar to 14, this is now 16 Houston Street, where 0.29 acres is proposed to be purchased by the city from the rear portion of 16 Houston Street so that it could be added to the cemetery. So again, it's a boundary line adjustment to adjust the boundary line over a little bit so that 0.29 acres ends up with the city as a potential expansion for the cemetery.
Thank you, sir. This time I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the boundary adjustment for 16 Houston Street? Hearing no one at 7:59, I'd like to close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I move that we approve the requested boundary line adjustment for 16 Houston Street to allow the city to expand Oak Grove Cemetery.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Smith, Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. And thank you to those residents for sharing those properties with the city. Next item is a public hearing and consideration of amending the noise ordinance. And I invite city manager to introduce this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. As indicated in my briefing, the reason we bring this before you is because we did have a series of complaints last spring. And we have them occasionally, not often, but we had some last spring. And while we were trying to enforce the ordinance, we came upon some, if you will, drawbacks in our current ordinance that didn't provide the tools necessarily or as much clarity as we'd like, so that we can enforce the ordinance in a fashion that was necessary in that situation. And we're not asking that great many changes occur in the ordinance. Maybe they're subtle or nuanced changes. And so that allows us to, in different situations, use different means or tactics to get enforcement. One of the things you might see in this ordinance is the reliance or the opportunity to use decibel meters, a more scientific measure of noise. In certain situations, that's a useful tool. In most situations, you'll see the definitions and the types of noises being regulated really haven't changed too much. You know, we talk about traffic, parties, yelling and screaming. I say parties, but social events, yelling and screaming, vehicles, construction activity, etc. In those cases, the only real big change in most instances is just the time. It used to be from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. or it currently is. And we're requesting that it go to 10 p.m. There's not really a large difference there, but we do hear from time to time from people who just want to maintain that quiet period earlier in the evening. So the purpose of the ordinance, of course, is to do just that, to make sure that the residents here in the community have quiet time, have peace in their homes and their neighborhoods. And you try and balance that against the, if you will, noise or sound that is normal in our community and normal in our society. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. No increase in, substantial increase in penalties. We're not trying to have more enforcement activities. It's just that when we do get complaints, we perhaps can deal with those complaints in a more suitable fashion. So happy to take any questions. And of course, the city attorney crafted some or all, I should say, of the legal issues that arise in the code. And it was an older code, so there has been court rulings and other changes that we incorporated, or the attorney incorporated, into this amendment before you.
Before council addresses the city manager on any questions, I'd like to go ahead and hold the public hearing to hear from the public. And is there anyone who would like to speak to this subject? Mr. Betts, if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, Nicholas Betts, 221 Massey Street. One thing I would just say is that I think it seems reasonable to make it 10 PM on the weekdays. Something you might consider is having a different, maybe leaving it in place to 11 on the weekends. I don't know if that's something that you've heard much from people on, but there may be a little bit more difference in time needed on the weekends. So I just thought I would mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As this council always says, we have a better product when we hear from our citizens, and we appreciate you being here. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item? Hearing none, I'd like to close the public hearing at 8:03. Council members, if you have questions for the city manager, or if you'd like to have a motion for consideration,
I have comment, question.
please.
When I read the ordinance, I had been following the Virginia Beach situation for some time, 4 or 5 years now. So they had a situation, I forget what year, 2017, maybe, I think it was Virginia Beach, where they were challenged, their ordinance was challenged. And when I read ours, it looks like it's Virginia Beach ordinance, pretty straight up. And they're mostly copied that. And all the numbers match up. And so that's fine. No problem there. One of the things that the Virginia Beach ordinance includes that tends to get around the situation of what the noise level is as measured by a meter is sounds that are plainly audible. They're very careful with including the plainly audible term in their ordinance. And it was, the other night, I went to the Virginia Beach website and they have the public hearing available on YouTube. And I listened to it, and the point was made very much at some length about the reason behind plainly audible. And the rationale behind plainly audible is that if you can hear it, it is a violation. It doesn't have to be measured. And one of the things that I find is missing from our ordinance, is a definition of ambient noise level. There's no mention in our ordinance about ambient noise levels. I would ask the question, would anyone know what the typical nighttime residential noise level is in the city?
Are you posing that to
I'm posing
council
that to-
or?
I'm posing that out in the open, but in particular to the city manager, since this comes from the city manager
No, I do not.
and perhaps the city attorney. Well, I'll tell you, it's 40. And the situation here where we're not going to take action until 55 or 65 in some cases. And just for curiosity, I was wondering if it really was 40. So you can download your noise measuring app on your phone, and which I did. And so I've been measuring here and there, different times of day as well. And I agree with the 40 at nighttime in here. And so to preserve 55 with the ordinance, to allow 55 is a far cry from 40. And so in other words, it's quite a bit of noise. One of the issues that came up several years ago was Kendall was going to install emergency generators. And they were going to install those generators physically at the backyard property line of one of the neighbors in my subdivision. And their plan was to install 3 generators that would be rated at roughly 1,000 horsepower. And they were taking a position that even though, yes, they're noisy, they're not that noisy. And their engineers were putting forward that, oh, it's only going to be 65. But noise doesn't work that way when you have three. And so would you know what happens if noise levels double? What levels dB changes when you do talk about doubling? City manager? It goes up 3. And when it triples, it doesn't go up 6, but it goes up roughly 5. And so their noise that they would say would be at 70. But that was going to be during the day. And the 65 that they had produced would be right at the tip top edge of our 65 during the day and way out of line at nighttime. Way out of line. Now, it's also my understanding that the reason we do permits in the city is to avoid having does several things. One is we know who the responsible party is whenever there's a gathering and whatnot, so we can contact them. And the other is just to make them aware of the timing and the noise issue. But they wouldn't be, those parties wouldn't be subject with a permit, with a legally obtained permit, to any of these noise levels that are listed in the proposed ordinance there. So I want to suggest that we consider noise levels that are lower than the 65 and the 60. I happened to look at Fairfax County noise ordinance. And the reason for Fairfax County was that there was a case that I encountered several years ago. And I think it was Robinson versus Fairfax County. And Robinson had property along the Dulles Airport access road that he wanted to subdivide. And there was an issue there, and so about noise. And so Robertson hired engineers to come measure the noise level of the property outside the houses that he was proposing to subdivide. And they did 24-hour day measurements, recorded it and whatnot. And the noise levels that they measured strictly from the car traffic was 65, 24 hours a day outside the house. Fairfax County at the time had a rule that said, well, it didn't really matter what the noise levels outside the house were, as long as the noise inside the house was within a certain specified number. And I want to say their number was 40. And I noticed in our regulations that are proposed, we talk about measuring noise inside the house, but it's that plainly audible phrase that will allow us to deal with noise outside the house in there. And they talked about the problems of having an officer come into the house when people call in to the police department and do the measuring. And so Fairfax County amended their noise ordinance to be 60 in residential during the day and 55 at night in there. And again, I think in this area where the ambient noise level at nighttime is 40, that's still allowing too much noise.
So we had a complaint though about a potential small restaurant where a neighbor complained about hearing an animal's footsteps outside their window and that wakes them up. And we pointed out that just a window unit, an air conditioner from a neighbor's house is 70 decibels. So I'm kind of confused. I want to go back.
But 70 at their house.
I want to go back to again, what the purpose of this is. And I also want to correct the record about this apparent misnomer about a noise permit, since that actually does not exist anywhere in city code, the legality of even having to get a noise permit, where our website says you should get it, but apparently there is nothing. It means nothing. this noise permit. So what was the reason for this again? Because it seemed to me that it was a neighbor that lives next to a university-owned fraternity house that felt like there was too much noise during daylight hours, and then maybe even at night. And so want to go back to that, since if it was a band at a fraternity house, that's owned by a private college, and that's one of the issues where noise permit would not apply to that. And so I'm just going back to what the whole purpose of this is. Worrying about decibels is going to put, I mean, it's kind of beyond me. I want to get back to what the purpose of this is, why we have a class 2 misdemeanor versus the county's class 3 misdemeanor, why we're saying 10 PM, the county says midnight. Like, what was the purpose of this again? Was it that one neighbor?
That was the genesis of dealing with this issue. Is several claims were being made as to violations of the noise ordinance.
But it was profanity. Really, the issue was profanity, loud profanity.
That was one issue. One issue that was brought up. We felt like we needed to define it clearer so we could actually help the individuals in the community describe, almost as Mr. Alligood said, what is the typical sounds that you can expect to hear in a community? You can hear loud voices. Loud voices themselves aren't necessarily, during the daytime in particular, a violation of the noise ordinance. We don't deal with free speech in this ordinance because it's not part of the noise ordinance itself. Obviously, in that case, as you said, there was a free speech element, but trying to make sure our ordinance was clear enough that when somebody said there's a violation, we could clearly point to the ordinance and say, yes, there is, or no, there is not. So we didn't have that constant tension or conversation of, I know this is a violation of the ordinance, and hopefully we can help inform and educate people on either side of that issue. I'm making the noise, or I'm the source of that noise, and the neighbor is unhappy, and both parties can understand what their rights and responsibilities are. So we had some gaps in that regard. And again, as we reviewed the ordinance, we understood and could see very plainly that it was very old. So there were holes in it from a legal standpoint that I wouldn't say it endangered our enforcement of the ordinance, but it provided instances where we wouldn't be as effective, maybe some jeopardy there that somebody could take us to task for it. And that's the legal necessity for reviewing any code, basically.
Can you speak to what the class 3, why the county might do a class 3, we might do a class 2, and then even if, let's just say hypothetically, a university-owned house is cited for a noise permit, who gets a misdemeanor? The university, or who gets that misdemeanor?
The second question first, that's defined fairly broadly in the administration enforcement. It's ultimately whoever has control over the noise. So if it's somebody out on the porch screaming, probably not the owner is going to be the person cited. It's going to be the person who's screaming. If there's some sort of sound system installed in the building that is continuously used every weekend to violate the noise ordinance, then it might be the owner of the building. So it really depends on ultimately the source of the noise and how best to address it. And that's why the text is fairly general to cover hopefully all cases where a noise is being generated, that whoever is ultimately responsible for causing that noise is the person or entity that's getting cited for it.
So police officers are able to come up to a house, and that's, again, go to my friend, the lawyers. I mean, that's, I guess, just they're able to force their way in to find the speaker system that is loud, and then on their way through the fraternity house, or any house for that matter, if they see another crime being committed, underage drinking. I mean, what are we putting, what kind of, are we asking our law enforcement officers to do to follow up on a claim here, to find the culprit, the owner of a speaker system?
I mean, ultimately, I'm not necessarily envisioning sort of that night going in and finding things. It's if it's outside of the building, causing the noise, who's in charge at that point? And potentially if whoever is there says, yeah, we've got this amazing new system that we just installed, and we're trying it out. That'd be further investigation to go on and sort of broaden it out. If there is sort of this continuing, and that's one of the issues with the criminal violations is sort of the escalation. If the first warning doesn't get through. So I don't think we're necessarily asking the police to do or giving really ultimately the police the authority to do sort of force their way in, as you say. It's more just the typical police work. But ultimately there are criminal violations potentially that the police would have the responsibility to enforce.
One of the things about the noise permit that isn't even on the books, but might actually make sense if it were on the books potentially, is that had a person's name on the noise permit. And then the police could show up and say, may I please speak to this individual? And they would tell that individual, you're too loud. We've had a complaint. You need to, this is your warning, or this is not a warning. This is it. It has to end now. And if it didn't end now or after the warning, then that individual had already said, I'm responsible for the noise. And it kind of takes that guesswork out of the whole thing. So I just didn't know if that was something that, since it doesn't truly exist in our current ordinance, the noise permit, if we should put it into our new ordinance to give people with even an event at Richardson Park or an event anywhere in Lexington where they think they might make a little bit of noise, that there's a responsible party point of contact.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any problem putting that permit process as it stands now or something similar sort of under this umbrella, putting this as an additional section so it is in the code and made clear to everyone that this is the process. Now, whether we would want to put just essentially a reference to that, and then that be a policy of the city manager or the police department that is then publicly available and enforced, I don't see any issue with that. And that's really where we're headed, I think, is how best to use whatever tool we end up passing, how best to use that on a practical day-to-day basis. And I think that would go a long way towards addressing a lot of these sort of the party concerns, is allowing those permits. And it sounds like it's one of these sort of policies that's sort of accreted over time, and we've just been doing it because that's sort of how things are set up. But I think this and sort of the overall idea of looking at these things is to go back and look at that entire process and see from start to finish how we can do things in a sort of a more planned way rather than just relying on what we've always done.
So would you address the plainly audible language?
The distinction there, in my mind, I think the easiest way to explain it is the distinction between civil penalties and the criminal penalties is that the civil penalties, most of these sections have the plainly audible standard. It's only when and that's ultimately, if we get to court to enforce these as a civil penalty, there's a much lower burden of proof. It's preponderance of the evidence. And so a layperson easily, the neighbor could come in and testify that it was plainly audible in my house. And then the other person would have to rebut that. It's then when we move to the criminal, which obviously there's both a higher threat to the individual, but also a higher standard of proof in court beyond a reasonable doubt.
Sure.
And that's where we would move in to have the decibel meter. So it's not just the neighbor coming in and saying, this was really loud and it was plainly audible. We've got a police officer, someone trained to use this equipment to say, this was above whatever number we ultimately agree on, but this was above 75 decibels as reported by my meter. That's going to be, I think, ultimately a lot more persuasive and give the city the ability to meet that higher standard of proof.
So the numbers are measurable only inside the house or at the property line?
Depends on, we've got a couple different ones, which we can go through where they're measured, but sound level inside the confines of another person's enclosed dwelling, or
Like H.
I'm trying to,
Yeah, so we're talking 55 inside the house.
right,
The noise outside the house would be much louder.
would be 75. And that was, so that A is inside the dwelling, B is outside of the dwelling. So I think we've got both of those covered. And the numbers, I mean, that's sort of just general, as you say, this is largely based on the Virginia Beach ordinance. And from sort of the survey I did, is this range of 55 to 75 seems to be sort of where folks start raising eyebrows about loud noises. I'm certainly not any sort of acoustical expert, and I'm open to any information that someone who is expert would like to provide in terms of changing these numbers. I'm not tied to these numbers in any way. So I'll just leave that at that.
Well, Fairfax County numbers, just as good as Virginia Beach numbers.
Well, that's ultimately the question, I think, for city council, is both looking at other jurisdictions or quieter or more loud than the numbers that we have.
It's always something we can edit. If we find that we've been too lenient, we can always tighten them up. I'm not quite so worried about the decibel level. We haven't really had any issues other than we need to be able to have authority to go to someone's door and, like David said, turn down the music and move on. Usually that's all it takes. I think this ordinance is a good start. I like the idea of including the permit process in there. I think the couple other little tweaks to it. Did you want to say something, Marilyn, first?
Miss Alexander, yes.
Yes, in regard to Jared and expert opinions, I'm looking at the American Academy of Audiology website right now, and the numbers are a little bit different. It might be something to look at. It might be some other medical websites to look at. For instance, 40 decibels is a quiet library. 70 decibels would be like a vacuum cleaner. So would we limit somebody running a vacuum cleaner at a certain time of night? Those are things practical things we need to take a look at. A concert would be 110. Fireworks 140, gunshots 140. So they've got examples of each of the decibels to give us some guidance.
I think that'd be the question, is whether rather err on the quieter side or err on the louder side. I will just say about the vacuum, it would be as if someone were vacuuming, your neighbor was vacuuming right next to you in your apartment. So that's how loud it would have to be, as if they were running their vacuum right next to you in your apartment. So they could run it in their apartment. Presumably it's not going to be the, whatever we said it was, the 70 decibels in the other apartment.
And things are inversely proportional to distance as well. Sound goes down the farther away. One of the localities that I checked on, just to get another sense of what numbers others are using, used 50 during the day and 40 at night for residential areas.
Yeah.
And for commercial industrial areas, they use 70 during the day and 70 at night. That's an industrial 24-hour a day operation, but it's zoned for that.
Mhm.
Residential, they use 50 and 40 in there to do it. So there's justification on what others have done. I would like to err on the side of quieter.
Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, Jared, quick question. I believe Leslie had brought up a potential issue where a Lexington resident might complain about the noise from Limekiln Theater, which is in the county. I just want to be clear, this would not be enforceable against Limekiln because it's in the county. I want folks to be aware of that. From my perspective and from what I've heard today, while I think this is a really good idea, I'm not I personally would not be ready to vote on this tonight. I think we need to cogitate it on a bit more. I do like the idea of the permit thing. I think that's a smart way to go, since people are already familiar with that vehicle. And, you know, we might want to consider Mr. Betts's idea that the weekends, I mean, we are a college town, let's be honest. You know, we might want to bump that out a little bit. Or, you know, one thing I'm concerned about is that there's so many variables here. There's like, oh, what's the weekend and when is it going to start? If there was a way to kind of simplify this a little bit, I would feel more comfortable with it. And while I certainly understand your concerns, Mr. Olligood, about, you know, residential and quiet, again, we are a college town, and you know, we have to rely on our neighbors to be good neighbors. And so this is really, this ordinance is really to catch the scofflaws, the people that are really, really egregious. And so for that reason, I don't think that we want to make it that tight. If ultimately we decide it's too loose, then we could tighten it up later, but I don't think we should start from that position.
And it's, as David indicated, the genesis of this review was from one neighbor upset with what she considered hate speech and profane language from a neighbor. And the city manager and staff took it upon themselves to review this ordinance, and when, in conjunction with the chief of police, came up with the recommendation that you have here tonight, to give them a tool, which all of our policies are tools to make our community safer and more respectful is the intent. Unless members of council have an objection, I'd like to continue the public hearing to our next meeting and for potential consideration at that meeting. If you have research that you would like to provide the city manager, or go about firming up the numbers, if you have a preference on the decibels, again, I would encourage you and lean towards what the chief thinks that is necessary for them to do the best job as a police force. Not necessarily what we want to see next door, because this isn't a widespread problem in our community and is just a tool for the police to use when there are scofflies or
Yes. Well,
Ms. Strawn.
right.
I wanted to bring up a couple other things to
Please.
consider in the interim on on H on page 5 of 10 or 6 of 11 on social gatherings and parties. I do think the current is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'd like to stick with that because we are a college town and a social town. On K, talking about construction equipment, the quiet hours are from, it says 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I think the people who are going to complain are residents. I think 10 p.m. is too late. I think dark or 7 p.m. is probably more reasonable, having construction hours from 7 to 7, something to consider. On M, on the trash vehicles, apparently our trash trucks start about 4 a.m. There are trash trucks, like my understanding is from the city manager at WNL and the hospital, which I didn't think about the hospital having their own trash trucks. I'm not sure why our limits should be any different than their limits. If why we don't let them operate at night if we do. But before we make that change, we need to talk to them to see if that's even feasible for their operation, especially for the hospital. I would imagine they contract that out. So I'm not sure. WNL does their own. I know where I work, they don't do it in the middle of the night. They do it in the middle of the day. So it's not a problem, but they just find it a little odd for us to be able to do it at night and not allow them to do it at night. So I think before we made that change, we should talk to them. Or did you want to?
I say nobody really likes to hear the trash being collected,
Right.
morning, noon, or night, but always thankful that Butch and his posse make it around to clean up the streets.
If I may, the reason we do it primarily from 4 in the morning until 8 in the morning is because we're up and down the street for minutes at a time. And as we know, there's no room on the street for anything other than a trash truck. And if you did it at 10 o'clock in the morning on Randolph Street, you couldn't get down that street for 20 minutes. You know, so that's why we try and get it done at that very early hour. Someone doing a commercial pickup, they've got one stop, whether it's the hospital or a business, they're in and out in 3 to 4 minutes. They're not going to hold up traffic on a commercial street or on a city street for 10 minutes. So that's why we've given ourselves, if you will, that latitude, because we couldn't operate otherwise, you know, in many places, of the community.
I know, I guess my point is, are they any louder than we are? Maybe the answer is yes, or.
Well, again, they may or may not be. It's not even an issue from our standpoint. Is it loud? It's an issue of we really can't do it any other time of day, loud or not.
Right. So I think it's kind of a fact of life. And so I'm saying we should consider, if we're going to hold them to a different standard, before we do that, talk to them to see if they have any alternatives. Otherwise, I don't really see why we would hold them to a different standard. Throwing that out for comment.
I think it's always good to talk to our neighbors, to inform them of something that is the city's considering that might change the way they do their operations.
I don't want to see it put out there that we have a particular standard that we can do 4 o'clock in the morning and other trash companies cannot. Even though it is loud, it does help in regard to traffic, especially in the morning when people are trying to get their children to school, and school buses. That has an effect. And when I read the house rules to new tenants, I let them know that one thing that they've got to get used to is the trash truck and the banging of the dumpsters at 4 o'clock in the morning. They get used to it. And then after a while, they sleep through it. I don't know how, because I can hear it 2 blocks up the street. And it's not as bad now as it used to be. So I don't know what the difference is, but to have a different standard for an industry, and have somebody else in that industry have another standard, it's kind of unfair. And in regard to Nicholas Betts's idea about a difference in the weekends, perhaps we could take a look at that the noise time can be a little higher on Friday and Saturday nights, maybe till 11, and then all the other days, Sunday through Thursday, 10, perhaps. So I think we have a lot that we need to massage in this, and perhaps wait to another time to make a decision.
Mr. Smith.
I can support that 11 PM idea on Fridays and Saturdays, especially in the summer. It doesn't get dark till 9 o'clock. And putting a 10 o'clock window on something in the summertime, I think would just go over poorly. Since we have a couple of LPD or Lexington's finest here, if it's not out of line, I'd like to, it'd be helpful for me to understand how many complaints Lexington Police gets during the year. That is it a lot? Is it a few? Other than this one incident at our university house. If it's okay for you all to speak to that, because it'd be helpful for me.
Would have to say that a large majority of our complaints are definitely coming from from students having parties and stuff like that. And occasionally some disgruntled neighbors that are angry at somebody cutting the grass at 7 in the morning or what have you. It depends. I do know that sometimes the complaints are a little less warranted, I guess. We get there and it's something that you would normally be doing and just about anybody be normally doing on a day-to-day basis, but somebody next door wasn't happy about it. I would say summer hours, I would not even summer, but like the warmer months of school, you probably will be seeing a lot more partying and a lot more people out and about and a little bit higher decibels of sound. When it gets colder, they tend to take it inside. So I don't know if that plays a factor for you guys.
Generally speaking, if you find yourselves having to go to the same house over and over and over again, do you tend to see a positive response from?
Most of the time, whenever with the noise ordinance permit, what we typically do is we go there, we will talk with the person in charge. That's kind of the whole reason why we have it, is that particular reason. We'll talk with the person in charge, tell them, hey, look, we've got a complaint, quiet it down. If we have to come back for whatever reason, the permit is pulled and this party is done. And that's kind of the way that we go about it. If it's already egregious and they've already kind of gone overboard immediately, we'll pull the permit right then and there, and then we'll shut it down. But we don't typically have, I'd say the fraternities are probably the repeat offenders, if anything.
Right. Okay.
So people are really using the permit system now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Alexander.
So when you have a noise permit and it's until 11 o'clock and it's been approved, if you're making the noise and it's 10 o'clock, the police can still shut it down.
Yes, ma'am. So the noise permit is, the common misconception is that the noise permit allows you to break the permit or the ordinance. That's not true. And they're actually advised that the permit doesn't allow you to break the noise ordinance. It only advises us that you are having an event, that the noise might be a little bit louder than normal, and that we know who to talk to, is kind of the premise behind it. Other than that, they don't have permission to actually violate the ordinance.
Right.
Any other questions?
One final one from the police department's position. Has the department ever not issued a permit because of repeat offenses?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being here and addressing those issues. Appreciate it. It'll help us as we discern what to adopt. Any other questions that members of council have and would like to discuss this evening on this topic?
I just want to comment to Chuck that remember when we used to have to approve the large capacity houses, and we would have to, or somebody would have to take a look at the police reports for various addresses. So yeah, they do take that into consideration. But another consideration is that, you know, in Lexington, a large percentage of our population happen to be young people. And I think maybe the compromise in regard to the weekday, weekend timeframe might be that compromise to be a little bit more lenient.
Mr. Ziegler.
And sorry, but the class 3 misdemeanor versus the class 2 that we're proposing, versus the 3 that's in the county, just what's the difference?
Difference is class 2 can actually impose a jail sentence. If you get to that point, class 3 is just a fine up to $500. Class 2 would be a fine plus the jail sentence.
So our first offense is a class 2.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
So versus the county's first offense is a class 3. So the first time you're allowed.
I'll just put criminal violation as opposed to the civil violation.
Oh, still, I just.
So ours is stricter than the county.
That's my, yes.
Right.
And yeah.
I mean, I would veer towards the civil violation, you know, the rather than the.
Same here. I would be more comfortable with the
class 3.
Class 3.
And that would be even, there would probably be a warning first before issuing a citation.
That's been my assumption, is that
I would hope so.
we go through the civil violation process until it's just clear this person is not going to comply with the civil penalties, then go to the criminal. And just because the class 2 allows the imposition of a jail sentence and a higher fine, it certainly doesn't require it. So it's a little bit stronger tool. And makes a real, I think, in my mind, a distinction between the civil penalties of $500, which is, but trying to think if that's the threshold for a class 3 or a class 4, but I guess the distinction between the civil monetary penalty and then criminal with the potential jail sentence is really putting meat on what it means to be a criminal violation as opposed to a civil violation.
But Jared, we just went through this with the snow removal, and it became an issue because it meant that if you got such a ticket, you had to appear in court, and it was up to the judge, and there was a lot of uncertainty as to what a judge would do. If it were a civil penalty, then I believe they could prepay that penalty, correct?
Right, and that's the idea with the civil violations is
Okay.
for things to be charged as civil violations. I don't think there's a cap. It's just subsequent violations go up to $500.
Yeah.
To be multiple civil violations, then the question would be when to take it criminal. And in my mind, once you make that decision to take it criminal, there has to be a real distinction there between we could, in theory, trump up the civil, the third civil violation goes up to $1,000.
I think we're imagining too awful a world that we would need to put somebody in jail for noise. So
I tend to agree. One question that occurs to me, if it's punishable up to a class 2 misdemeanor, the officer isn't required to issue a ticket at class 2. They could give a lesser piece. So it would be at the discretion. If it is an egregious situation, and I think part of the logic behind the class 2, when this may have been first written or back, was to send a strong message to the fraternities and other folks that may be leaning more towards partying and not respecting their neighbors, that this could be an eventual conviction or problem because they kept thumbing their nose. Paying a fine was not a big deal. Oh, it's only $100, no big deal. We'll keep it going until 3 o'clock. So just a matter of perspective, given back in the 70s and 80s, things were a little different.
So in the system that's proposed in this ordinance, civil and criminal 2 parts, the civil side will be theoretically taken care of with the plainly audible situation. And the actual noise measurements with a noise meter will give the concrete information for and how many feet it was measured from the source for the criminal side, should that become an issue.
Right.
Exactly.
I was going to echo what the mayor said, is that, really what we're talking about here is a tool that in the egregious situation, as the officer said, we can do something. If we've had 2 or 3 reports, we've given them a warning, and about the 4th one, they're just blasting out sound. We don't have to deal with it anymore. We give them a ticket for a class 2 violation. Okay. Send that message. Will it happen? Probably not, but it's a tool we have available should it happen. That's all. We're trying to not issue violations, and most of the time, as the officer said, we're very successful at that. But provide us the tools that if that opportunity arises, we can make it very clear that we didn't want to come back 3 or 4 times. We shouldn't have to.
Well, we will continue this public hearing and council's consideration to our next meeting. Again, if there are specifics after you reflect on this evening that you'd like to see in this ordinance, please pass it along to the city manager for his adjustments to consider. And I know he and Chief will bring this back to us at our next meeting. Next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes from October 20. Thank you, Janie, for detailed minutes. Unless there's any objection, we'll approve those as presented. Very good. Next item on the agenda is citizens' remarks and comments. I didn't look to see, but is there anyone here who would like to speak this evening? Kathy, come on up. And please state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Kathy Waters, 614 Ross Road. And I'm a pedestrian. I walk. I was thinking today that I probably walk, if not hundreds, then thousands of miles since we've been here in Lexington. And the more I walk, the more I'm thinking in my mind, there's got to be something that could be handled a little bit better. So I was kind of ticking things off my mind. First off, I would request that the city make a crosswalk where Woods Creek crosses Lime Kiln. Right now, there's no crosswalk designation. And I have kind of gone to that curb a few times. If you catch somebody's eye, you can safely cross, but there's nothing there as a crosswalk. The second thing I'd like to ask, if there's a way to make it a little bit easier to see the street light on Main Street at Houston and Jordan. As you're walking south, you can't see the street light as you're trying to gauge when it's safe to step out.
Speaking of the traffic light.
The traffic light, right.
Okay.
You look around, you can't, there's the guards around the lights. And you can't see if it's green or if it's red. So you're kind of looking around to see where the lights are, where the cars are. And I'm familiar, so I know how to do that. I mean, I'm kind of gauging that, but it's a little unsafe. And my next one is my biggest peeve is the hands-free carrying or devices in cars. People are driving through town with their cell phones. And I hate to say, but city employees are doing it as well. I see trucks with city employees with their hands on their phones. I see them every day. And I don't know what the enforcement is. And I would just like to make a comment to please somehow enforce it. Let people know, maybe on both ends of 60 coming into town, maybe on both ends of 11 coming into town, that is the law. And then city is going to enforce it. So that was my only point. So
Very good.
we can somehow make it safer for pedestrians.
Thank you, Kathy. Certainly, several of those ideas would make it safer for automobile operators as well. So making our streets safer is certainly a goal that we have as a community. Thank you for sharing those. And yes, it is certainly against the law currently to use a cell phone. Bluetooth, I think, is the law of Virginia. Not sure about other states, but in the state of Virginia, you're not supposed to utilize your cell phone except by Bluetooth. So, very good. Any other citizens who would like to speak to council this evening? Hearing none. Next item on the report, boards and commissions, Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
No report. Advisory committee meets on Monday. And then regular board meeting the following Monday.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Main Street, Lexington.
Main Street, Lexington. The winners of the Main Street Scarecrow Contest are first place Southern Inn, second place Main Street Purveyors, and third place Downtown Books. Of course, everyone was a winner because they have a fantastic and unique decoration in their window. And most of them are still up if you haven't had a chance to look. They are great. And it was fun to talk to the business owners. Everybody had a story about their scarecrow. And Main Street invites you to join us for the 27th annual candlelight processional and community tree lighting on Friday, November 25th. Gather at 5:15 at the Main Street entrance to Oak Grove Cemetery, step off at 5:30 and sing down Main Street to Hopkins Green for the tree lighting. Santa and Mrs. Claus will greet the children, and this year's songbook will be available via your phone with a QR code. The talented Birdettes will lead the singing at Hopkins Green. Love Lex Lotto begins right after Thanksgiving, and registration is now open for the Christmas parade on Friday, December 2nd. The theme is Sounds of the Season. Also register now for the Jingle Bell Run on Saturday, which is on Saturday, December 3rd at 10 a.m. And the Gateway Triangle project continues as we wait for the raised beds to arrive and to be installed. And the design committee is in the early planning phase for the old courthouse square remodeling project. The area has fragmented ownership with 8 different property owners, but all are in agreement to help improve the space. And a steering committee is being created to work along with the Main Street Design Committee. And that's all I have unless there's any questions.
Do you have a sense of the timing for the triangle garden
No, just like I said, they're waiting on materials.
delivery of
Right.
materials?
You know, I do know they're going to plant it with sedum and we'll miss the growing season for that. So they'll put something in the interim, but we won't get the sedum in until the spring.
Okay, thank you very much. Planning Commission, Ms. Strawn.
Planning Commission met on Thursday, October 27th, and the Green Infrastructure Working Group final report was presented. It is excellent and it'll be tweaked a bit, but should be ready to present to council in early 2023.
Terrific. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Strawn? Hearing none, Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Ayers.
Thank you. The tourism board met on Wednesday, October 26th, and our main business that day was to review the grant applications for our sponsorship program for the period from January 1st of 2023 through June 30th. And we actually only had 2 applications. Most of the applications come in the second half of the year. More events are planned on that. So we reviewed applications from Gravista Bike Race and the Lexington's Juneteenth celebration, and we awarded Gravista $3,000 for their event, and Lexington's Juneteenth celebration was awarded $1,500. And one bit of news, Tourism Director Gene Clark shared a study from Virginia Tourism Corporation that looks at travel-related spending for each of the 155 localities in Virginia. And the study is really useful in figuring out how your county or city has bounced back from COVID, because it gives you information on state and local tax receipts and travel expenditures for each of the past 5 years. So you can kind of see what happened. And it was really interesting. Lexington, and I actually have those printouts for the 3 localities for you guys, but Lexington, of all of the localities in Virginia, did best at travel expenditures. We are up 71% in the year 2021 compared to the year 2020. That was way higher than pretty much everybody else in the state, and certainly higher than Rockbridge and Buena Vista. And it's interesting, if you look at like local tax receipts and state tax receipts, we are actually up above our 2019 numbers. So we have fully sort of bounced back. And in Buena Vista and Rockbridge have not reached their 2019 numbers yet. And so we spent some time thinking about that on that Wednesday. And we thought maybe a lot of it has to do, 1, with the horse center, but 2, certainly the George's expansion and all the stuff that has brought a lot of visitors to our community, and that's really helped us. So I just wanted to point that out. And that's it, unless somebody has a question.
Those changes, was that in meals tax and bed tax, or just?
I think that is meals and bed tax. That's lodgings and meals taxes. And here are those if you're interested in them. And I'll give one to Janie so she can put it in the.
I think that, Buena Vista, I think they only have one. Actually, I don't think they have any hotels.
Yeah.
So there are no bed taxes that they're collecting.
Right.
And then as far as restaurants, I would suggest the prices, in addition to the volume, have helped Lexington's numbers.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for the report. Rockbridge Area Recreational Organization.
Our board of directors met yesterday. We are concluding the fall sports in senior league football, for example. Lexington and Buena Vista played in the Super Bowl, and Lexington won 7-6. Tonight, Buena Vista is playing Allegheny in the Junior League Super Bowl, so hopefully Buena Vista wins that game. As soccer concludes, we're going to have juniors and seniors playing in some all-star competitions, which we have not previously done. So they'll travel to Covington and Stanton to play in some of those tournaments and events. Pickleball continues to thrive. You all probably know that the city of Lexington went ahead and purchased 3 mobile net units to be used at Brubaker Field, kind of near Kids Place on that basketball court, where 3 courts have been striped that will allow some folks to play. Rivermont continues to be used a lot for pickleball. Thank you to the city of Lexington. At a previous meeting, we approved the carryover, the surplus funds. Buena Vista did that tonight with their funds. And then Rockbridge County, they were waiting till everyone else did it. And then Rockbridge County will do that with their funds so that RARO has access to them. RARO received a couple of grants, $500 from Babe Ruth League Foundation to buy field drags for a bunch of our fields. And then we got some money to buy some football helmets via grant money. And then as we get into basketball season and wrestling, I always like to tick off all of the basketball courts that we're using and scheduling. So just bear with me and then I'll conclude my report. But we are using Moy River Middle School, both courts, Lilburn Downing, Central, Fairfield, Natural Bridge, Mountain View, and Waddell. And then Rivermont's being used for pickleball indoors. So we continue to make good use of all of the facilities that we have access to in Rockbridge County and Lexington. So we are appreciative of the school districts of Lexington and Rockbridge County Public Schools for allowing us to use those facilities. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, David. Any questions about RARO? Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
Thank you. Threshold met last Wednesday, the 26th. One of the first things we talked about was about commercial and residential inspections. We talked about the commercial fire inspection program. Trent Roberts does inspect restaurants and schools located in the city every 2 or 3 years. There are currently 3 firefighters that are in the process of being trained to do fire inspections as well. And the intent is to have more regular inspections once there's an adequate number of inspectors. In regard to the residential inspection program that ended, the authority to run that program was recently, of course, removed from the city code. But to reinstate it, it would have to be readopted and staffed with appropriately trained individuals. And there was a discussion of the benefits of inspections. And one of those was to help prevent catastrophic fire damaging. One fire could damage multiple buildings in our downtown, in the historic downtown. Other business, we talked about a warm shelter in Waynesboro, WARM, and that is for a shelter for homeless individuals. And RARA does provide funding for gas and transportation to get to that shelter in Waynesboro. The Valley Mission is still open, but it stays so much at capacity. There had to be a need for something else. So there is a shelter in Waynesboro as well. And then there are other shelters. There's another shelter in Roanoke. And Fred Kirshner, one of our long time members, talked about Buddy Derrick. And he said that he believed that Threshold was one of Buddy's most important accomplishments. And I did not know that Buddy Derrick helped found Threshold. And I was devastated because I felt I had so many opportunities to get to talk to Buddy. And I could have been able to glean information about the history of Threshold from him because I just know a little bit from when I just really wasn't paying attention. So opportunity missed. And we talked about our current purpose and minor goals that we might have until we get the results of the housing study, and then we'll gear up for more. We're going to be following up on the housing repairs that we were doing pre-pandemic, what needs to be finished, who's still on the list, and that we still have a couple of $1,000s in grant funding to take care of those repairs. And that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Any questions on Threshold? Maury Service Authority, Mr. Alligood.
The Maury Service Authority board meeting was recent. And one of the new things that we were informed about was there's going to be a workshop to discuss and to hear from the consulting engineers the information for the wastewater plant modifications. I was under the impression that we were going to hear about that sooner, but now apparently is when it's going to happen. And it hasn't been, the date of the meeting has not been set at this time, but it's supposed to be this month in November. So I'll let you know as soon as I know in there, and that's also in terms of money that's floating around, that's the really big ticket item. The numbers, the estimating numbers that are floating around are $40 million for that modernization at last report. And again, there are no contractors bids on any of that, so it's pretty loose, but it's a large amount of money, and so I'll keep you posted as soon as I know.
Any questions for Mr. Alligood? Thank you very much for that report. Just have a couple of items. You all received a forward of an application for the tree board for Tony Williams, who has an interest. If you didn't take the time to look, our tree board is full, and the folks that are appointed through 2024 at this point. So I have not been, but we'll be in touch with Miss Williams to see if there's another way that she might want to serve the city in the interim. But just to make her aware of our current, but the efforts that Janie has with the weekly report and inviting people to consider volunteering on a board or commission for the city is paying dividends. So I'll pass along those thanks to Tony Williams. Also, it's been quite a bit of conversation and chatter about our neighbor at Grands, who Greg Moore with Channel 10 was in town today, and he wanted to interview me to see the cities and more specifically the mayor's take on the changes going on at that address on Main Street. But he wanted to do it after he interviewed Grands because they were going to let him know what the future held. The only thing he said he learned is that they're locking the door on Saturday. That was the only specific. They further went on and he said it felt very scripted, but they of course have operations in Waynesboro and Roanoke most closely, and are still committed to the Shenandoah Valley and very much interested in finding a location in Lexington. I assured him that we would make contact with Grands and let them know of spaces available in downtown Lexington that might suit their needs, as well as in the surrounding area. Somebody mentioned that the former Peebles facility might be a good place for Grands, but they are not disappointed in leaving the community, which is no surprise to me. But the conversation that I had with Greg was focused more on their changes going on in our city. And we've been under construction since about 2000. If you think back to the Lexington Presbyterian Church, Cornerstone Bank, the Gin Hotel, just to name a few. There's some others, and I will leave somebody out, but we've been in perpetual construction. And I'm not sure what will happen with that building. I don't know, heard rumor that it's under contract, but don't have verification from anybody credible. But the next phase, the city would certainly support downtown commerce and commercial activity, and look forward to learning who may be the new steward of that building and supporting their efforts. But just wanted to put that piece out in public, and you're here, not able to see Greg's report on Channel 10 tonight. And he does a great job. And if you're not aware, he's a graduate, a rocket from Natural Bridge High School, and he loves to be able to come back and showcase Lexington and Rockbridge County and the things going on here. And unless you have any questions, that is my report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few items tonight. One of the first I have is that VDOT is beginning to actively consider the schedule for the replacement of the Lime Kiln Bridge. There's no firm schedule in place currently. However, they have asked staff if it would be advantageous to have any kind of a public meeting and presentation. And we did affirm that we felt that would be very useful. When such a schedule is put in place and a meeting date is confirmed, I'll of course let you and the community know. Just over a week ago, we had a water line leak identified at Washington University. The university identified it. Turns out it was a fire main that was leaking. They went ahead and of course fixed it, repaired it immediately. And we saw a very significant drop in water usage at the WNL campus once that was repaired. Now, at this point, I don't have enough information to tell you or the public what kind of a reduction we might see in water usage, but it's good news for all of us, for our consumers and for us as a city as we start looking at our budget next year. Fire department's been very busy recently. They were out most of the weekend for events centered around Halloween and trick or treat, including a kids pumpkin party at Mountain View Terrace Apartments. The chief informed me that one of the brave journalism students that we may have hosted during our last several meetings decided to ride along with LFD one afternoon, the first, that is, of this month. And Chief Dickerson said they held up well and claimed it was quite educational. The department is participating in a large-scale planning exercise hosted by Washington Lee, and they have also been working with Rockbridge Co-op for a 3-day training session at the co-op's bulk propane storage facility, which is obviously a very unique facility and very important that our first responders know what they should be doing when they approach that facility and there's an emergency of any sort. The department has installed and went live on a new national fire incident reporting system, and this system permits automated reports to FEMA and the state on a routine basis. On the police department, both the police department and the fire department staff participated in a community walk at McMath Circle. As you heard from Mr. Petty, the mounted unit horses are at the horse center in the old Hoofbeats facility. Our school resource officer Hasten participated in parent-teacher conferences at the middle school and elementary school recently. And the department staff is working to coordinate the annual Christmas events happening soon throughout the community. The department participated in the area-wide drug take-back event, and DC Fitzgerald has been working with our new CAD system to finalize new modules for the system for use in law enforcement. We've probably all heard, in fact, I know we've heard about the opioid funds that the city and other localities are receiving. The city attorney has been reporting that regularly. The state of Virginia has a Virginia Opioid and Abatement Authority that is formed, and this authority was formed to help contribute or allocate funds to the state and also localities. And I believe it's a very useful agency in this case because they are providing information to us as to how we can best comply with the federal regulations, the regulations coming out of the settlements with the manufacturers and distributors. And they will also, if we comply completely with those regulations, provide a 25% increase in our allocations over this period of time. And this is about an 18 or 19 year payout. Now, frankly, most of those years we see a very small amount coming to the city, $1,000, $1,200. But if we can be assured that we're in compliance with all the rules by following what they call their gold standard, and we receive another $250 a year, there's no downside in that. So it's a positive thing as I see it at this point. We'll be hearing from them in the middle of the month in January as to how they're going to roll out the rest of their programs and support for us as localities. So there'll be a seminar one day down in Virginia Beach, I believe, on the 19th of January. So a few updates from planning. Our Building Board of Appeals is meeting on the 14th to review an appeal from Washington University pertaining to construction of a wall at the University Chapel that would not meet current fire and safety codes. Looking at the activity in the planning and development department for the year, activities are pretty much on par for what we saw last year. We have administrative activities are 47 to date, and there were in 22, and there were 48 last year. Enforcement activities are 946 this year, and there were 1,093 last year. Permit fees are $128,533 this year. They were $98,165 last year. And year over year, the value of improvements are $18,142,549.22 and $14,833,032.21. So we're on par or exceeding what we've done in 21, which is generally good news. Recently, the Rockbridge Area Community Services held an information meeting on what our region needs to do to comply with the state Marcus Alert legislation. And we are required to have a plan in place by July of 2026. At this time, we must create a voluntary database at our dispatch center by July 1st of 2023. Our two cities, county, RACs, the dispatch center, and law enforcement agencies will partner to complete this effort. And really, at this point in time, is seen as a low bar with a low cost to put that in place, that information system. So we're not going to be pushed too hard on the Marcus laws at this point. The Appalachian Regional Commission has announced grants of $100,000 to hire staff to research the availability and usefulness of the ARPA funds that are granted in the Appalachian communities, and we do qualify. Buena Vista, Lexington, Rockbridge County, Bath County, and Allegheny counties all qualify Bath County and Highland counties qualify in the Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission. So we're going to head up there tomorrow, county administrators and city managers from those localities, talk with the PDC staff and see if there's reason to go ahead and apply for that grant to hire a person to research what other grants might be available to us. There's no commitment of dollars. There's no necessity to make this a full-time permanent position. So it really seems like a no-brainer to go ahead and take the money, get somebody on board, have them spend time over the next couple of years researching what's available, and maybe we'll find some money and maybe we won't. But we'll report back to you later on that. Chessie Trail Runs. Councilmember Smith and I were at the Rockbridge Outdoors meeting today, and the Chessie Trail saw a jump of almost, a large jump from 400 some participants in their runs to over 500 participants in their most recent runs. They attribute this mostly to the fact that the events are now qualifying for nationwide, qualifying events for nationwide marathons and similar activities. And I will say that some of the businesses did say there that they saw significant increases in business while that run was on this past, the past run. I don't know, when was that, last week, Mr. Smith? Yeah, so they were pretty pleased, at least a couple of businesses, with what they saw. I will note that one of our council members is also going to be the chair next year of the Rockbridge Outdoors. So I wanted to take time to read a letter that I have from a jail inmate. I think it's pretty profound and pretty positive. As I've noted to you in the past, the jail commission, jail staff has spent a lot of time trying to put activities and programs in place to assist inmates as they leave the jail to re-enter the community, have skills, have opportunities to succeed in life after incarceration. So I'll read this letter. The individual said it was fine to read it. He sent it to the jail superintendent and who shared it with the jail commission. It goes, "My name is Brian Pitsenbarger. I had a short amount of time in the program, around 30 days. From the beginning, Mr. Tom Whitlock has been full of knowledge and willing to share his experiences and how his life has changed. The administration here is admirable. They take the time to talk to you and want to help you in any way. They want to help you succeed and make a smooth release. They care, and it's amazing to see someone reach out to help rather than just keep you in a cell or a pod all day. I've been involved in numerous things, working in community and helping build the classroom with things that I can take to the streets to help me succeed and live a productive life and spend time with my kids and family. I want to thank the administration and staff here and Mr. Tom Whitlock for this opportunity." And again, I think it speaks volumes to the fact that from time to time, we are able to affect lives very positively and have impacts that are real. So I hope Mr. Pitsenbarger does have a very successful release, but it's good to hear these positive messages. That's all my report has for this evening. Any questions or comments?
Ms. Strawn.
I'll make a comment. If you could pass along to Public Works, our thanks for the improvements they made to the intersection at Jefferson and White Street. They added some crosswalk markings like was commented in the public comment section that show that it is a one-way street, and also to make it easier for pedestrians crossing. And we thank them for that improved safety. And then also just a reminder that Veterans Day is Friday, November 11th, and there'll be a nice celebration downtown at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Ms. Strawn. Any other questions for the city manager? City attorney report.
I have no report tonight, but am happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Any questions for the city attorney? Hearing none, thank you for the brief report. I'm not aware of any new business to come before council, and we have no closed session. And unless there's an objection, we will stand adjourned. Thank you all very much, and meeting adjourned at 9:17.
Thank you.